Hey, everybody. Thank you guys so much for tuning into our live stream. For those of you who don't know, my name is Josh. I'm lead pastor here at Redeeming Hope. And we just finished a little watch party here a few minutes ago, watching our message for today called A Slave by Choice. And so now we're doing a live Q&A. I see a few people are already on and responding, so thank you guys for doing that. Just kind of a reminder of our main point that we just finished talking about. For those of you who weren't able to join us, this is based on, like I said, what we just talked about. But this is our main point, and essentially what we saw today is that we are invited to become a doulos, a slave to God, living in complete and immediate obedience while receiving His unconditional protection and provision. That was our kind of main point for today. And this is, again, a little live chat. So if you look in the comments section, you should see some primer questions that I have for you. I kind of wrote down a few of you who are being active on there and making some comments and questions and stuff like that. And just to let you guys know, and like I mentioned before, I've got Rachel and my mom here. They typically join us every week. I've got Robert, and then I've got Chip and Donna is Chip's aunt, and she's visiting here from out of state. So I just said, hey, why don't you come over? She's been joining us live, and so they're sitting here. So I might, a little bit later, just say, hey, do you guys have some input? And you might see me look off camera, and that's because they're sitting at my kitchen table. So a couple of things that I just kind of wanted to prime us with. So I noticed that I did quote Bob Dylan, and I wanted to give you guys the quote for Bob Dylan, which I thought was great. I think I've used it before, but this is relating to, even Bob Dylan kind of identified that kind of everybody's a slave to somebody. So this is the quote from Bob Dylan. Everybody's got to serve somebody. That's the song. You may be an ambassador to England or France. You may like to gamble. You may like to dance. You may be the heavyweight champion of the world. You may be a socialite with a long string of pearls, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. Yes, indeed. You're gonna have to serve somebody. It may be the devil or it may be the Lord, but you're gonna have to serve somebody. And guys, I think what Bob Dylan was getting at is what we were talking about today. This idea of we all are a slave to something or someone. And the question is, what are we a slave of? Are we a slave by default to sin? Are we going to be a slave by choice to God, who loves us and provides for us and gives us everything we need to ultimately thrive? So it's Sarah's mom. I saw earlier she joined us from Hammond, Indiana, and I didn't know where Hammond, Indiana was. So I was on my laptop as we were kind of sitting around the couch all watching. And what was really funny was I Googled Hammond, Indiana, and I didn't see how close it was to Chicago. And so Rachel and I have been to Chicago a bunch of times. But thank you so much for Sarah's mom joining us. Happy Mother's Day. Luann joined us as well. So Luann, thanks so much for joining us. Like I said, my mom is joining us, and to all the other moms out there. Sarah, I see that you're commenting. To Christy, if you're online, Christy Allen, and all the other moms. Melissa Christie, new mom, just a few weeks ago, just had a baby. Aaron and Anna just had a baby as well. We just love you guys, and we're so glad that you're joining us and tuning in. So I'm so glad that you guys are there with us. And we were also talking about how Gary was not wearing socks earlier when he was helping us record the live stream. That's what we're chatting about here. A couple of questions. Like I said, I dropped in some questions. What's surprising or different for how you understand slavery in the first century? What text was kind of this text was challenging for me, as I was looking at it and thinking about it. So we had Sarah from earlier say, for me, it's a source of peace. Because it takes away the whole idea where you have to create an identity yourself, do certain acts or not do certain acts to be good enough. I have to look to God, and He will shape who I am. And I think that that's just so important, Sarah. So thanks so much for contributing. Donna said it was interesting how the first century slavery was different than modern slavery. So she had made a comment earlier just about how she had it was clarifying for her to see the differences. So that's kind of this new perspective of slavery to help us understand the analogy that Jesus is presenting to the disciples. So we're talking about the slave versus master and trying to see this idea of protection and provision coming from our Father. And Gary said the slave has less responsibility when you really look at it. The slave has to worry about one thing and one thing only, whereas the master has to look at the many facets, which is often overlooked. Like Stan Lee said in Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility, and this is true even for God. God is responsible for our well-being, and he has all the power. And Gary, you're 100% right, buddy. He does. God has all the power, and he's ultimately responsible for our well-being. And this is so important that we have to remember that, in that analogy, I'd always thought, well, the slave is the one that's working, right? But God is taking care of everything, right? God is taking care of all of our needs simultaneously. And so it's not like God is just sitting there with his feet up, demanding us to serve him. What he's actually doing is inviting us into the work that he's already doing in the world. That's what being a slave to God is he's inviting us to enter into the work that he's already doing in the world around us. And then ultimately it's for our good. It's so that we can thrive, which I think is just absolutely fascinating. Guys, do you have any thoughts on that idea of protection, provision, slavery? Anything came to your mind? Oh, did you? Okay. Robert posted something in the chat. He said, every day I have to delete my Facebook app. Every day. I had to delete my Facebook app yesterday. It was distracting from what was important. I got to call my mom, take a walk, and pray. And Robert, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. I've had to delete the Facebook app on my phone multiple times just because it's, in my mind, it just invites so much comparison. And, it's hard sometimes for me to be a slave to God when I look at my peers or the people that I think are my peers, or maybe even people that are my mentors that are farther along in church planning and pastoring than I am. And then I look at that and I think, what the heck am I doing? And then I get bitter at God. Like, I'm doing all this work for you, God. Why aren't you growing our church faster? Or why? There's always somebody that has a larger church. There's always somebody that's skinnier, that's buffer, that's better looking, that maybe is a better preacher. And it's like, why can't I be there? It invites this comparison, right? And I think, who was it that said comparison is the thief of joy? Somebody said that. I don't know. If anybody remembers, you can let me know. But somebody said comparison is the thief of joy. And I think that's so true in my life, right? And so it might be a Tim Keller quote, but I think it might be like Albert Einstein or somebody else. So this is something that's deeply rooted in our hearts, is this temptation to compare. So I'm a follower of Jesus. I love Jesus, but it's still hard. Still hard not to compare. Still hard to be thankful for the things that God has given me. Sarah actually commented too, to Robert's point, and said Facebook can be very distracting. I deleted mine a couple months ago too, and you're right, it is really hard. And Gary was talking about this idea: selfishness is the root of doubt when it comes to the goodness of our Master. We too often want what we want, and that does not help root us in God. And Gary, you're right, 100%, man. And isn't that going back to the garden, not believing that God is giving us what we need? That's the core sin. That's the core temptation that Satan used against our original father and mother, Adam and Eve, right? He said, did God really say this? And then he says, you will certainly be like God, knowing good and evil. And he tempts Eve and Adam to make this decision to disobey God, because there's a questioning of, is my father going to provide for me? Is my master going to provide for me? And really, that's a core temptation for us. And Robert said the quote, comparison is the thief of joy. He actually Googled it as we were sitting here. He said it was Teddy Roosevelt. So I want to give proper credit where credit is due. But yeah, and Robert said, I find myself doubting the goodness of my master. And it's so easy to doubt, right? It's hard because we don't, it's not physical, right? Like, Jesus isn't in this room with us right now. And so it's a little hard sometimes because we don't see him physically in person. And so it can be sometimes hard to doubt, like, is God really providing for me, especially when we're going through difficult times? And I think it's okay. Like, it's not okay that we're doubting, obviously. We want to not doubt. And it's not like that there's some sort of excuses that we have to give for ourselves, but I also think God understands. The book of Psalms is filled. We've been in the book of Psalms this week because I think we're starting next week, Psalm 13 to 18 in our Bible reading plan. And in Psalm, I think it was maybe even Psalm 13. It begins. This is really fascinating because we're going through a Bible reading plan as a church together, right? So if you're not on it, we'd like to invite you in to read the Bible with us just a few times a week. And this week was Psalm 13 to 18. So Psalm 13 opens with this. It says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me?" Like, that's a person that's questioning the goodness of God in that moment, right? He's questioning him. How long, God? And here's the thing. Even when we question God, it's okay. We need to bring our doubts. We need to bring our questions. We need to bring these things to God. And that's totally fine. And God can take it. God can take our doubts. God can take our questions. And when we bring our doubts and our questions to God, what it does is it increases our communication with him. It increases our intimacy with him. That when we are experiencing doubts and questions, we don't have to run away from God. We can run to God and say, "God, I'm feeling like you've abandoned me." And what God does, because guess what? That's the psalmist, right? God included it in the Bible for a reason. Because we have the right to come to God in any state that we're in. When we're angry, when we're frustrated, when we're happy. And so even when we're frustrated, I want to remind us, come to God. Express our frustration to him, because that's what the psalmist did. That's what David did. And David was called a man after God's own heart. Because he, in every scenario, even when he questioned, "God, do you still love me?" And as Donna said, and he doubted God's goodness. And you're right, Donna. He absolutely. Job did. Okay, she was talking about Job. Sort of like Job, God was testing Job, and he doubted God's goodness. It's a great point, right? And even with Job, Job went to God. He doubted God's goodness, but he went to him. He used it as a driver for a relationship with God. And what does God do at the end? God shows up. He speaks to him. He comforts him, even in the midst of incredible loss and pain. And God wants to do that with us. But he wants us to make that step to come to him, right? And even that step to come to God is still empowered by God. For the Christian, you have the Holy Spirit that lives inside of you that allows you to come to God in whatever state you are in and communicate with him. And if you're not yet a follower of Jesus, you can begin to come to him. You can begin to talk with him and say, "God, I don't even know if you're real, but if you are, show yourself to me." And I guarantee you, if you're sincere in that, God will show up. I've always made that offer. Actually, I do that with my men's groups. I say, if you come to men's group and you read the Bible for 4 weeks, 15 minutes a day, 3 days a week, and you do that for 4 weeks and God doesn't show up in your life, I'll buy you a steak dinner and I'll stop bugging you. That's what I say. I'll never invite you to any Bible study again. You're off the hook, ever, right? Because I believe that strongly that when you have a sincere heart and you come to God, he'll speak to you. So good, really good points. A couple of other things. Let's see here. Got a few people that have commented. Yeah. When we were talking about submitting to God, Sarah had a great point. She said, think about it. God is responsible for all things to be for good. And with a world full of people who have free will, what a job that is. Talk about herding cats. That's great. Or herding chickens, right? Sarah, you've got those chickens that you're waiting to get the chicken coop for. The least we can do is listen when he directs us. And you're right. But you know what? It's still hard. It's still hard to listen. And Don had made a comment about the fruit of being a doulos. We were talking about areas where it's easy to submit or not easy to submit. Let's see. Don said, 1, I need to listen for my master's voice, and 2, I need to respond immediately. Whitney said, not presenting our doubts to him is withholding from him. He hasn't knocked off his rocker that we struggle. He simply wants us to be bold enough to say it. He will show up. And she got the heart signs. Whitney, that's so right. You're 100%. We can sometimes, and I think, Whitney, you're dialed in. You're 100%, because I think sometimes we can seek to withhold relationship with God like we're punishing him. Right? I know that for me sometimes, like I'm angry with God, I'm upset with God, and I'm just like, you know what? I don't want to talk to you today, right? And I sometimes feel that way. And really what we're doing is we're not withholding anything from God. We're just not receiving the benefits that God is already pouring into our life. We're just missing them. Because God's grace is like a waterfall. It just pours into our life. From the moment you become a follower of Jesus to the day you die, God's grace is pouring into your life like a waterfall. And really, the coming to God is us just becoming aware of what he's already doing. And so if we don't come to God, guess what? We're the ones not receiving the benefit. He is not knocked off his rocker. You are 100% right. He is not knocked off his rocker at all. He wants us to be bold to say it. And here's the deal, and this goes to something that's very specific to our context. Our 4 disclaimers, and actually I'm going to put them up here. If you don't believe the Bible is true, you're welcome here. If you don't identify as a follower of Jesus, you're welcome here. If you're hurting, you're welcome here. And if you have questions, you're welcome here. Now, my friends, let me tell you something, and then I want to stay on this for a minute with what Whitney said. Because here's the thing. I believe that Jesus wants us to be our authentic selves with him. And so often what I've seen in the church context is people put on the face. They go to church, they look good, be good, act good. They're dressed in khaki pants and loafers and polo shirts, which, by the way, if that's how you dress, all good for you. But you understand what I'm saying, right? Like you kind of dress up a certain way, you come into a certain context, right? And you kind of shake everybody's hand, Lord bless you, Lord bless you, Lord bless you, right? And you sit there and you sing in that deep baritone voice, or you hit the melodies, right? And you sit there and you take notes, and you open your Bible, and you're very solemn, right? And then you get up and you leave, and you get in a fight on the way home. Right? And you go home and you're angry and you're upset and you're not at peace, right? I've seen that so often in my life and in other people's lives. That's not what God wants for you. He wants you to come into a family where you can be your authentic self. So that's why I say, if you have questions, if you don't identify, if you're hurting, if you don't believe the Bible is true even, you are welcome here, because this is where we grow, is when we bring our unique, honest, authentic selves in all of its mess and all of its brokenness in front of the God of the universe, and then he takes that mess and transforms it. He takes that mess, like we talked about last week, the seed being planted in the soil of God's sovereignty, being planted in the soil of God's grace. That's what grows us into a new thing. It's not the fact that we're good. It's the fact that we can bring our brokenness to a perfect God, and he begins to change us under his power, under the power of his love, under the power of a new way of living. So thank you for sharing that, Whitney. Robert said, I often want God to change my circumstances more than I want him to change my heart. And Robert, you're right. And I do too. I struggle with that, man. I really do. Is that we look at, and I think sometimes it's hard for us to see that God redeems the difficulties that we go through in order to bring us into a new understanding of who he is. So the hope for the Christian is not that your life will be completely 100% healed and whole. Like we talked about last week, God's kingdom is present. There is an opportunity for healing. But it's also not fully yet expressed, which means that there's still brokenness in the world, and there will be until Jesus comes back. And that gives us something to look forward to say that one day the whole world will be set right again. And so there's actually an interesting video, and Robert, if you'll make a note of this for me to remind me to post this, it's called the J Curve. And I want you guys to listen to it. It's a talk from, and actually, Robert, if you look in your emails, you might be able to find that link I sent you. Yeah, post it in the comments. That'd be great. And Robert's working on that. But it's from a guy named Paul Miller. And he talks about the J Curve. And it's actually related to Paul. I listened to this. It was fascinating. But it's related to Paul saying, I want to know Christ and the fellowship of his suffering. And there's something that happens when we enter into a new life with Christ, but then we always go through a death, right? Sometimes physical death, the death of a loved one. But we might go through difficult times. That can be a form of a death of a dream. And God always brings us from life into death so that we can experience resurrection. So he calls it the J Curve, okay? And so when we're in these moments of difficulty, challenge, and struggle, that is something that God wants to put to death in us so we can identify and become more like Christ so that he can bring his resurrection power in that can bring us into a new understanding of who he is. So our life is just a series of J curves: life, death, resurrection. We experience goodness, truth, and beauty. We experience death in certain areas. Maybe it's a career. Maybe it's financial difficulty. Maybe it's marriage difficulty. Maybe it's struggle with your career, with identity, with reputation. Those things will actually be like a form of a death. And then as we turn to God in faith, we then experience his resurrection power to bring us into a new understanding of who he is. Sarah said this, that's a great way to put it and a good reminder. To have God change my heart would transcend over all circumstances. I needed to hear that today. Well, thank you so much for sharing that, Sarah. I appreciate that. And, we all need this reminder. We all need this reminder that God truly loves us deeply. He cares for us deeply. He longs for us to experience his goodness and his grace. And ultimately, he will give us what we truly need. And man, I tell you, there's a quote that's been tooling around in my head the past 4 weeks as we've been talking through this part of Luke. And it's a quote from Tim Keller, and he said this about prayer. He said, God gives us what we would have asked for if we knew what he knew. Okay? God gives us what we would have asked for if we knew what he knew. And so I think it's just so important as we see God as a master, as we enter into this idea of a doulos, a slave to our master, King Jesus, who loves us, who gives us what we ultimately need to thrive, that even in the midst of the work that he assigns for us is giving it to us so that we can thrive and grow, who brings us from a period of peace, oftentimes all the time, using our difficulties, using our death like a curve to bring us low, to bring us, to free us from all the things that we're seeking identity from outside of Jesus, to bring us into new life. That's what type of master that we have. That's what type of father we have that loves us. Anything else before we move on? Any other thoughts? Everybody's quiet in this room, but they are commenting on this, which is great. So that's some of the fruit of being a doulos. I want to kind of remind us, we're kind of coming to the end of quarantine here in Clarksville, at least for the main part. But I want to remind us of these things that we have been discussing and talking about as it relates to redeem the quarantine, redeem this unique time in our lives, unique time in our culture. So 7 ways to redeem the quarantine. The first way is to be honest. If you're struggling with God, if you're struggling financially, if you're struggling relationally, it's okay. Bring it to God. If you need prayer, come to us. We'd love to pray for you. Robert posted something a little bit earlier about texting us if you need prayer. So thank you, Robert, for doing that. If you need anything, be honest about what you need. It's okay. To be human is to be in need. To be human is to have needs that only Jesus and community can meet. So be honest about where you're at. Stay in the scriptures. Guys, we have a reading plan. There's few things more important than spending consistent time with Jesus. So I want to invite you to do that. I don't want you to placate with social media or movies or distraction. All those are really good things. Like we say every week, all those are good things. But just be mindful of how much time you spend on social media and TV and YouTube and all those other things. Use this time as an opportunity to connect with other people, to read, to spend time with the Lord, to spend time with your family. Just don't distract from your emotions and what you're feeling with social media and other distractions. Fourth, I want to encourage you to rest. You don't always have to be at work. You don't always have to be driving. You don't always have to be doing stuff around the house. Take time to rest and enjoy the season that God has brought us in. And in general, I just want to remind you, and this is something that comes up pretty consistently in the life of a Christian and in what we see, is that the invitation of God is to rest. Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." He doesn't give us burdens or more tasks to do. He gives us freedom and grace. So I just want to encourage you with that today. When you come under the Master encourages you to rest, and I want you to rest. Another thing that we just want to encourage people to do is exercise. Just get out, get in the sun. It's a beautiful day today. I'm looking out my backyard right now, and I see my nap sofa outside. So I might try to get a nap later on today. But just get in the sun, Get out there, walk around. It'll be good for your soul. Don't just stay in the house all day. Another thing, intentionally connect. I actually saw Robert text it. He said, I've taken the opportunity to text some friends and family. He said it's been great. So just intentionally connect with your friends, with your family. Like I've been saying every week, millennials are answering the phone now, guys. So make some phone calls, okay? So call people, FaceTime. Rachel and I had an opportunity this week to FaceTime with some friends out in Austin. John and Monica. We FaceTimed with our friends Mook and Katie. And it was really great. So we just utilize the tools that you have to connect with people in your life. This is a great time to do that. And finally, seek to have ways to serve. Well, we did the swag bag initiative a couple weeks ago. And for those of you who don't know, it's called the 3, 2, 1 swag bag initiative. So most people in our church got 3 bags, or you got 1 bag with the invitation to ask for more if you'd like. And the goal is that you give away 2 and you keep 1. Okay, so I want to encourage you to do that. We're putting 200 more swag bags together for you to hand out to your neighbors, hand out to your friends. It's got like hand sanitizer, lotion. Got little toilet paper, just as kind of more of a joke now because there's a toilet paper shortage in Clarksville. Got little Rubik's Cubes and cards, a few other things in there, and then also a half sheet on ways to connect with our church. So we just want you to encourage you to give those out to your neighbors and friends and shoot us a text message to let us know that you would like some more, and we'd love to give you some more to hand out to your neighbors. Let me see. A couple of ways to connect with us this week, okay? Ways to join us. So we're going to do a 6 p.m. prayer call because unfortunately we got, I don't know if you saw on our Facebook, but we got Zoom bombed. Unfortunately, there's some not good content that was displayed on our Monday night prayer call. And it was partially because we didn't have some security features in place. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be posting a unique link every week to the Zoom call. We're going to have a password, okay, that's separate from that link. So you click the link, you got to make sure you have the password. And then it'll actually go into a waiting room in which I'll have to let you in. So we're going to create some additional steps for safety so we don't have unfortunate content being displayed through people who are malicious. So we're going to create some extra protection. So please make a Zoom account to join us, but we'd love to have you back on the prayer call at 6 p.m. on Monday. Wednesday at 3, we do a live Q&A. So we'd love for you to just put that in your schedule, especially if you're a part of our church, especially if you call Redeeming Hope your church family. It would be really helpful to have you on and share that live. It's an informal Bible study live Q&A. Another thing is we're doing all our groups on Zoom. Our groups for tonight are not happening because it's Mother's Day, but you can also text us at 931-326-4512 for ways to connect with us. And actually, let me just put that up there again. That number is 931-326-4512. Robert also said, wash your hands, which is, was that? Facts. Yep, those are some facts right there. Wash your hands. Guys, I love you. I'm so glad that you're joining us. God gives you his grace, and I just want to send you into Clarksville this week, regardless of where you are, what you're doing. Redeeming Hope, we send you as missionaries in Clarksville to follow Jesus and help others find him. Peace be with you.